Saquon Barkley should have been on the cover of Madden, but I think Joe Burrow and Ja'Marr Chase will be on next year's cover. We'll discuss on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso, with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome in to the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, and I am back, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the Data Queen, Michelle Majuk. On today's episode, we're going to talk about who should be on the cover of Madden next year. Again, I got a unique idea I'd like to throw out there. We're also going to talk about a few tight ends who are on the trade market with Jonnu Smith and Kyle Pitts. And then I'll continue to kind of hammer home my narrative of the offseason that the Detroit Lions are going to take a step back. And we got another big example of why that might be the case. Before we get into all of it, I do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Michelle, of course, we will start with Saquon Barkley being on the cover of Madden. And of course, my guy, Legacy Louie, had something to say.
Saquon Barkley is on the cover of Madden 2026. I think it caps off potentially the most accomplished non-quarterback individual season for an NFL player in league history. The main play of the season, the backwards hurdle against the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Kelly Green, is what is going to be featured on the cover of Madden 26. I think we knew it was coming, especially when they won the Super Bowl too, that this was going to be the cover of Madden. Now it is official, and I think it's awesome.
I think it's awesome too. I think before we get into who might be on it next year and everything, I think the reality is that Saquon Barkley was the perfect choice for this season.
He 1000% deserved it. And I feel like this, as soon as he did that move, he was pretty much inked in to be on the Madden cover. But I mean, his season was ridiculous. And like he said, they won the Super Bowl. Everything just matched up well. There's no, yes, Ja'Marr Chase had a fantastic year, but the Bengals, they didn't even go to the playoffs. And we've seen a lot of other seasons like that, just like a really great receiving season. It's not like Ja'Marr Chase's was anything like historic at all. And it's more rare to see what, Saquon Barkley did last year. So I am all on board with him being the cover.
And I think Josh Allen would be maybe another guy you could be like, oh, maybe Josh Allen should have got the cover. He finally wins his MVP. He obviously had a great season. But like you said, I think the rarity of what Saquon Barkley's season was trumps anybody else at any other position, in my opinion. So it was the clear choice. I didn't see anybody upset about that. I don't think you could be upset about it. Saquon Barkley had maybe, like Louis said, the most accomplished running back season we've ever seen, up there with like Terrell Davis winning Super Bowl MVP. Maybe that's the one. He went 2000, all that. But this is as best as we've seen probably since the turn of the new millennium.
Yeah, and I am wondering, if Josh Allen was on the cover 2 years ago, they weren't going to put him on it again.
Right.
So that was an easy decision for them, right? Like if Josh Allen hadn't been on it yet, I wonder if it would have been a really tricky decision to make. Now we just have to worry that, hopefully he doesn't have that Madden curse like Christian McCaffrey saw this past year. It seems to happen to running backs. I mean, running backs haven't been on the cover very much lately, but yeah, the Adrian Peterson, ordeal, and Christian McCaffrey, and
Peyton Hillis.
Yeah. Oh my
what
goodness.
happened to that guy? Yeah.
I totally forgot about that. My list, I only screenshot it since 2013. But that, just got to worry about that, I guess, because I do think the Madden curse is kind of real.
Well, there was a long run as a person who does play Madden and has consistently throughout my life here. There was a run where it was really bad for a lot of years, right after the 2010s, I feel like. But there have been some examples where it didn't really hurt any, like Justin Jefferson was on a cover recently, I believe. And of course, he's been incredible every year. So I think it does depend. For me, the running back thing where it's it seems to happen. Well, maybe that's just because that's what happens to running backs. You know what I mean? One of those sorts of things. But looking at who could be on it next year, and obviously an element of this is who we think might have a great season next year. I did want to throw out the idea of, you mentioned Jamar Chase earlier, with what he did last year, kind of being like, yeah, I am the top wide receiver. And then Joe Burrow. I mean, the Cincinnati Bengals as an organization don't have a ton of pop, but there's no doubt that Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow as a combination really do. If they have a great season this year and they really bounce back, Chase puts up similar production and the Bengals do make the playoffs, maybe win a playoff game, something like that, I think it would be a very logical choice and a very likely choice to see Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase on the cover of Madden this time next year. I think that would be a fun way to go about it.
I do think if one of them gets it, they'll do both, right? Because they're both.
Right.
If Joe Burrow has a year like he had this past year, it's going to be because Jamar Chase went off as well. I mean,
Yes,
I can't imagine how not else, right? And also, let's say a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson wins MVP again, right? All three of those guys have already been on the Madden cover as of recently. And Joe Burrow just misses out on MVP again. I feel like the Madden's going to give it to Burrow and Chase.
That makes sense. I did want to throw one more name out because there's one name that I think is the most obvious that could take this right away. And it's Jayden Daniels. Jayden Daniels, if he continues the ascension that he's on and he doubles down on this year, we hear so much about the sophomore slump and you worry about, people getting tape on what Cliff Kingsbury was doing. His adjustments have been called into questions at time. I do think if it doesn't go to like an established superstar like that Jayden Daniels is the obvious choice because he's the biggest rising star in the NFL probably right now. And if he were to double down on that, I could see Madden going for, instead of going with an established veteran like Burrow and Chase, going for that guy who could maybe capture the younger fans and could be he could be like the new Cam Newton in the way that Cam Newton really captivated the culture and the younger generation as well. So I think Jayden Daniels is probably the other obvious choice.
Yeah, I had him on my list as well. If Jayden Daniels takes another step forward, he's going to be a strong candidate for the cover, especially if the Commanders, make a long playoff run again. My first instinct was to go with Bijan Robinson because I think there's a really strong argument for him to have 2,000 scrimmage yards and close to 20 touchdowns this year. I think he's just going to have an absolute monster year. However, it's been two straight running backs. I don't know if they'll do a third one. So I have two off-the-cuff ones. Well, I don't think this is off-the-cuff. Myles Garrett, right? That's not off-the-cuff. Let's say Myles Garrett or Parsons has a monster sack year. They haven't had a year on the cover since 2015 with Richard Sherman. So they might put a defender on there, right? And then let's say it's not a defender. I think a sneaky one could be George Kittle because I also think he's going to have an absolute monster season.
Yeah.
He put up 1,100 yards on just 94 targets. He led the NFL in yards per target over the last two seasons as well. And with Debo gone, Brandon Ayuk not coming back till half the season, I think George Kittle's target share is going to go up greatly, as it should. And if he can put up 1,100 yards and 8 touchdowns on 94 targets, imagine what this man can do with 130 targets. And if he has a monster year and the 49ers can get into the playoffs, I think he could be a sneaky choice.
No, I'm with you. He has a big personality. A lot of people recognize him. In San Francisco, you got to think about some of the bigger markets here, and the 49ers are just a really popular team, and that sells it. That's why if a defensive player did get it, I wrote down Micah Parsons because the Dallas Cowboys, whether people like it or not, they still have that pull. Parsons is a big personality, does a lot of media. If he went for, 20, 21 sacks, the Cowboys go to the playoffs, I think they would, the Madden team would love to get a Dallas Cowboy on there and say they put a defensive player on there for, diversity's sake, which is funny to say when talking about football positions, but I think people understand. But with that in mind, we do need to move forward and talk about some of these trades that could happen with some tight ends. Jonnu Smith, Kyle Pitts, should they be on the move? We'll discuss. Do want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Look, the NBA playoffs are in full swing with the finals right around the corner, and every night is going to deliver highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments, whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player. There's never been a better time to get in on the action, and FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Me personally, I think the Thunder are going to win the NBA Finals in 5 games. So I'm going to be betting their money lines, their spreads, going to be looking at SGA over on the point totals. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. And if it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Michelle, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Again, it's good to be back, folks. Fun first episode here, kicking things off, talking the Madden cover, but I do want to talk about some of these trades that I heard about while I was out on vacation and exploring the beach. Jonnu Smith, Miami Dolphins, sounds like he could be on the move, and my guy Kyle Krabs from Locked On Dolphins talked about the latest with Jonnu Smith.
But here's the big difference for me as I try to objectively look at the Jonnu Smith situation, and that includes who is Jonnu Smith as a player, what impact did he have on the team, where was the impact good, how did he benefit from the other players around him within the offensive scheme, how do you want the offensive scheme to be different this year? Compartmentalizing all of that, along with how is it different than Jalen Ramsey and Tyreek Hill. And the biggest one is Jonnu Smith's in the last year of his contract. His 1 year remaining. It's for the 2025 season, and then he will be a free agent. And there is an element as you put yourself in Jonnu Smith's shoes. This is an opportunity to take advantage of a very productive year last year and secure more long-term financial flexibility and stability and financial freedom. And it's a big moment as an individual player, right? There are some guys that are getting financially more than Jonnu Smith, where I think Jonnu had to pay the price of the contract that he signed in New England. That was a really rich deal. I think it was $12 million per year, and it was signed in like 2021. And let's be honest, those Patriots offenses sucked. They were horrible. They had no clue what they were doing. So then he gets out of that. He comes off of that contract, and kind of the stigma is he's an Arthur Smith merchant because he went back to Arthur and had another reasonably productive season. But he's a skill and role specific kind of player, right? But when you look at financially where he was last year and where he's going to be this year relative to not just the record-setting production of this year, but even his record production, Jonnu Smith has a point.
I mean, 88 catches, 884 yards, and 8 touchdowns in a league where finding really, really good tight end play can be very difficult. I feel like Jonnu Smith does have a point. The question is, do the Dolphins have a point in looking to trade him? Because Adam Schefter reported again over the weekend that now conversations are back on between the Dolphins and the Steelers. As somebody who likes the Steelers, cares about the Steelers, would you want them to make a move for Jonnu Smith? And what kind of would make it okay in your eyes if they did it?
It would have to be, a really, really cheap 6th, 7th round pick, maybe
Right.
5th at the very most. I mean, it's like, okay, last year, finally, in his 8th career season, he finally put up over 500 receiving yards. That's the first time he did it. And yeah, cool. He got a ton of volume. I mean, they had a lot of injuries on Miami.
111 targets. His highest was 70. Before
the Dolphins offense was so bad when they were targeting him that much. Like, it wasn't good. He averaged 10 yards per reception. Like, it's not like he's a dynamic tight end where you're averaging 13, 14 yards and you're as good as a wide receiver and you're getting it done. He just got it done because he was a necessity. He got volume. I would not want to pay him if I'm the Dolphins. And as a Steelers fan, sure, Arthur Smith found ways to use him. He'd go back with Arthur Smith. They did just their backup tight end, Donald Parham, just tore his ACL, I believe, yesterday. Okay. So, if they want to use more 12 personnel because they have no wide receivers either, then fine. But it better be cheap.
Yeah, it seems like that the Steelers' plan here is just to go major 2 tight end, which is Arthur Smith's calling card. At the end of the day, he loves his tight ends. He was a tight end coach for the Titans before he got moved to offensive coordinator. He's always been partial to that position group and always found a way. He did get, a great season out of Jonnu Smith back forever ago, it feels like now, in Jonnu's 4th season in the NFL with 8 touchdowns that year. So I understand the connection. If I'm the Steelers and I can pay a 6th round pick because I know I got to give this guy a raise for like 2 or 3 years or something like that. With where they're at, if their plan is, let's just say this, if their plan really is bringing in Aaron Rodgers, and that's the plan, then if I'm the Steelers, I go out and I give a veteran minimum contract or just a little above that to Gabe Davis. I make this trade for a day 3 draft pick and then bring in Jonnu Smith. And it's like, okay, we have a more explosive tight end in Jonnu Smith. He may not be, Brock Bowers or something like that, but he can move. You could throw those screens to him and get creative with him a little bit. And then you have Pat Freiermuth, who's more of the traditional tight end. You have DK Metcalf, your number 1. You have another big wide receiver in Gabe Davis, who wasn't worth the contract that he was on with Jacksonville. And I think everybody knew that from the moment that they panicked after they lost Calvin Ridley. They did not think that they were losing Calvin Ridley, and they panicked, and they, doubled down, try to get Gabe Davis before he would have been a nice match with Calvin Ridley, but then they didn't get Calvin Ridley. It's like, why do we have Gabe Davis? Why did we do this? We're taking a wide receiver anyway. So I think Gabe Davis, at the rate he's going to get on his next deal, is worth it. I think he's become a little underrated now because of how bad it was in Jacksonville. He could come in and be a solid, number 3 wide receiver that plays that second outside wide receiver role. So Gabe Davis and Jonnu Smith, if you're bringing in Aaron Rodgers for the cost of, a veteran minimum contract and then the pick that you got to flip for Jonnu and another $10 million, if that is their plan, I think that that's what they should be doing. The question is whether that's a good plan for the Steelers. I don't think it is, but if that is their plan, that's the right way to do it, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the whole plan. That's their plan every year, right?
Right.
10-7 get killed in the wild card round. And that plan that you just laid out is a perfect plan to do that.
Do you think Kyle Pitts would be, not maybe for the Steelers, but just in a vacuum, Kyle Pitts versus Jonnu Smith, do you think you would give up a 3rd round pick to take in Kyle Pitts because there's more talent and upside versus maybe a 5th or a 6th round pick for Jonnu Smith considering the money?
Yes. So I think Kyle Pitts has been wildly overhated at this point. I'm not even a Kyle Pitts truther. I'm a big fantasy girl, and I've always been like, don't draft Kyle Pitts. You're just wasting your pick. But I do think as an actual NFL player, he's being pretty hated on. He's only 24 years old still. Travis Kelce was 24 years old as a rookie. He didn't even have a catch in the NFL until he was about turning 25.
Yeah.
So he's still massively young. His last 2 seasons that are the biggest disappointment in the world to people, right, are still would be the 2nd and 3rd best seasons of Jonnu Smith's career. And again, Jonnu Smith didn't have that 600 yards until his 8th NFL season. And then just looking at his 4 years in the NFL since 2021, he ranks 5th among tight ends in receiving yards, while being very far down there in targets and receptions. He averages 13.5 yards per reception. That's a type of difference maker at tight end. He maybe just he's not being utilized right. Maybe he just needs out of Atlanta. Who knows? But I would much rather take a shot on him than go with Jonnu Smith. However, I do think there's a lot of good landing spots for Kyle Pitts if he were to be traded.
What do you think?
So right off the bat, the Chargers. That would be very exciting.
Yeah.
The Jaguars, because they lost Evan Ingram.
Yes.
Go with, Trevor Lawrence, and they already have fun outside wide receivers with Travis Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. That becomes a very interesting offense. The Rams, I know they did just use an earlier pick on a tight end, but still. Washington Commanders, Zach Ertz is getting mighty owed, and that could be fun. Yeah. There's a lot of landing spots for him. So if I do think the Falcons should trade him too. I don't think they should pay him. It just hasn't worked out there. Move on. Get a pick. Don't pay him. Let someone else pay him and move on.
And I think obviously a big part of this conversation is expectations. If Kyle Pitts was drafted, at the beginning of the 2nd round, probably wouldn't be talked about the way that he is. But when you're a top 5 pick and, there's all this pressure, I think that is a big part of the conversation. So you're right. We've probably gotten to a point where he's overhated and he's getting too much crap for just the player that he is. And that expectation, that 1st round expectation that clouds the conversation probably won't go away until he's not in Atlanta anymore and people can kind of move away from, oh, that's who he is. But speaking of moving away, I think that the Detroit Lions are going to be moving away from being in the playoffs. All right, Michelle, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We talked about the Madden cover, who could get it next. We talked about tight ends on the move here, some potential trade targets. But now I want to talk about some other news in the NFL. And we got a big retirement, a little bit of a surprise retirement, at least for me on the outside looking in. But my guy Matt Derry from Locked On Lions talked about Frank Ragnow retiring, their All-Pro center.
Hi, folks. Big news from Allen Park today is Lions All-Pro center Frank Ragnow has decided to retire. That's right. Ragnow, who did not attend OTAs last week, and there was speculation was unhappy about his contract with 2 years remaining, has just decided enough is enough. He wants to listen to his body, as he posted on his Instagram page, and thanks the Lions for everything during this process, but he's just too banged up, too hurt, and has been through too much. So at age 29, All-Pro center Frank Ragnow retiring from the NFL and from the Lions. Tate Ratledge, whom the Lions drafted in the second round as a guard, also can play some center and did during OTAs last week. He's likely the favorite to at least be the center this year. You got to throw in Graham Glasgow in that mix as well, of course, who has experience at center. More on Locked On Lions coming up later today, right here on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So look, I'm spinning the narrative. People say, oh, the media, their agenda. You're dang right. I'm pushing my agenda. The Lions are going to take a step back this year. There are so many reasons, so many examples of why this could be the case. Number one, I think the Bears are going to be a better team. We already know that the Vikings have a great infrastructure. We know that the Packers are going to be a solid team. They have been every year under Matt LaFleur. So that's a tough division no matter what. The Lions are still going to have a number one schedule, a very difficult schedule, multiple primetime games, road games, in big moments, all of that. You lose both your coordinators, and if both those coordinators are good enough to be head coaches, well, boy, you are losing some real talent on your coaching staff. Dan Campbell is not an offensive play caller, not a defensive play caller. There will be an adjustment period for him, along with the roster, losing some pieces here and there, and I'm not overly enamored by what they've done on the edge so far as well. They've made some improvements here and there, but you lose your All-Pro center. Your left tackle, Taylor Decker, gets a year older. Kevin Zeitler, right guard, gone, goes to the Tennessee Titans. I think there are a lot of changes here in Detroit, and it's a competitive division. They're going to miss the playoffs.
See, I could not be further against you.
Ah!
And I have so many reasons why, but you could stop me at any point. But so you mentioned they lost both coordinators. I do think that's the biggest thing to worry about. However, they are the sixth team since, the 1970 NFL merger. They're the sixth team to lose both coordinators to head coaching positions in the same offseason. Those other five previous teams all made the playoffs the season after. Yeah, after losing those guys. And two of those five teams ended up actually making their conference championship. So it's been okay for all other teams to still make the playoffs. Now, the Eagles were kind of a disaster. And kind of
Yeah.
But
they did make the playoffs. So
and they were a good
the
team
data's
until
clean.
the end. They were a good team until the end. It was just they
fell apart.
Yeah. And then with the, with the retirement to Frank Ragnow, yes, that's a bummer to lose your All-Pro center, but I do think they were prepared, right? I love that they took the guard or slash center.
I like Tate Ratledge. I like him a lot. Yeah,
he's real good. He has a ton of experience, 4 years at Georgia, but mostly at just right guard. But he's already 24 years old, and I actually think that helps them. Like, he's experienced. Right. He can play center if they need him to, but I like Graham Glasgow's a solid option to move the center. He had to actually start at center last year in week 4 when Frank Ragnow missed a game. The Lions scored 42 points in that game. Goff went 18 for 18 for 292 yards, and the Lions had 116 rush yards with 3 rushing touchdowns. They didn't miss Ragnow whatsoever in that game. Now, it doesn't mean they won't miss him for a full season, but they have options on offensive line. And then you just talked about how stacked they are on offense with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, and Jared Goff might be the most underrated quarterback in the league. They're making the playoffs.
All right, listen, that's fair. And I get that you could go, the data queen could go this data piece, this data piece, this data piece, and be like, but I'm saying it's the wave, the totality of all of these different things crashing down on them at one time. That's what I want to see.
What about all the guys coming back from injury, though, right? Like they went 15-2, and by the end of the season, they had 12 defenders on IR going into the playoffs. But like they're gonna get back Aiden Hutchinson, and we'll see if Marcus Davenport can ever stay healthy. And Aleem McNeil and Alex Anzalone and Derek Barnes and Malcolm Rodriguez and Ennis Rakestraw, their second round pick last year. David Montgomery, who missed the end of last year. They're getting back so many guys. I think that's also like something we're overlooking. They were able to do that last year with all the injuries.
Yeah, they were. You're right. So my question would be, obviously, I've said I think they're going to miss the playoffs this year. Where do you think they rank in the NFC North then? Do they win the division again? Does somebody pass them? Do you have them just right back up at the top?
They're right back up at the top. I do think the Bears will be better. And if Ben Johnson could just make miracles happen, then maybe they'll compete for it. But I don't think they're there just quite yet. The Vikings with JJ McCarthy, who knows what they'll look like. And the Packers, I don't know. I don't believe in Jordan Love personally.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that is a spicy one for the NFC North. I think it's going to be interesting. I think this year, we talked about this recently on the NFC North. I think I'm going to go with the Packers to win the division. I think the Bears make the playoffs. I'm going to have the Lions and the Vikings both out as of right now with the ability to change. Of course, I'm not a believer in JJ McCarthy. So like that's where I'm at. And I'm just curious how the rebound happens in Detroit. But should see some more moves in the next few weeks. Do want to remind you guys that as those moves happen, we're going to get a full breakdown from Locked On NFL Scouting. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast for your second listen, because you made Locked On NFL your first listen, and we definitely do appreciate it. But that's going to do it for us today. I am your host, the Madman, Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, the Data Queen, Michelle Majuk, as we tell you every single episode. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there.
Bye, y'all.